Hey, this is Rick Faza on the Drive Podcast, and we're going to be doing a little business finance again today. And then what you're left over with is profit. I know what it is. And we hear these stories about plumbers. Oh my God, yeah, I thought you would be charging $50 an hour. We live in San Diego. I can't even drive to you for $50 an hour, right? Because I know that because of my numbers. And then now for most small businesses especially, you're typically looking for somewhere in that 10 to 25% range. And keep in mind, that's important because a lot of this is going to go back for taxes. Hey, this is Rick Faza on the Drive Podcast, and we're going to be doing a little business finance again today. One of the questions I get pretty frequently is around pricing. How do you come up with pricing as a trades company? Obviously, there's thousands of plumbers, HVAC technicians, electricians all around San Diego and even broader in the country. So one of the things that's really important, I always tell people, it starts with understanding your numbers and the finances, because if you understand your finances, your numbers, and how you're coming up with the prices, that's when you know, one, you're charging a fair price. You can say it confidently and with conviction, and you're not going to get in this back and forth on everything. Also, you can share the information with your team so they understand where this is coming from as well, so that they have the same confidence and conviction in talking to customers. Because let's face it, the reality is, especially after the last 2 years of all the inflation we've seen, prices have gotten crazy. Even on something like a water heater, I remember when I first came into the business, even in only 2021, it was basically like half the cost of what we're seeing now. And that type of fast-paced rise for customers can be really concerning when they think if maybe they're getting taken advantage of or something like that. So we really need to understand how we're coming up with the pricing so that we can confidently know, one, we're not taking advantage of customers, we're giving them the fairest price we possibly can. And that also helps our team avoid back and forth on questions on discounting, because then you can confidently say, hey, we're leading with the best possible price we have. And if that price doesn't work for you, of course you can go shop elsewhere, but we don't think you're going to find the value elsewhere that you would find with us for the price that we can, and we can stand confidently behind that. So I hope that's a hopeful context, but then how does that actually work? So what we like to do is starting with the profit and loss statement. So again, you have just kind of generally speaking, if you break this into 3 groups, you have your sales, right? You have labor. That is the cost of the plumbers and apprentices to directly go out into the field. You have your parts. That is typically going to be then your gross margin. So I like to think of that as the cost to deploy that field labor there. You then have all of these other costs. So marketing, I'm just going to go fast, so excuse my bad handwriting. Call center, everything overhead, insurance, gas, everything else, all of the stuff that goes into this. So let's just put a big overhead here, just be all encompassing. And then what you're left over with is profit. And then now for most small businesses especially, you're typically looking for somewhere in that 10 to 25% range. And keep in mind, that's important because a lot of this is going to go back for taxes. A lot of it's going to have to go back to reinvesting back into the company to be able to grow, right? Your vans are going to break down. Your equipment's going to break down. All of that stuff needs to come from profits. So don't think this is just, hey, this is all money going to the owner's pocket. It would be beautiful and nice for all of us if it was, right? But that's just not reality. A huge, huge chunk of this is actually going back for either taxes or reinvestment back into the business. But you need that in order to operate healthy. So once you have that dialed in, you're then able to figure out, okay, so what do I need to charge in actually order to do this? So a great starting point, of course, is going to be your overhead. A lot of these costs can be fixed, right? Things like your rent, your truck payments, if you have them, if there's any lease payments, or if you're making payments to the bank, if you took out a loan or something, for example. So you start dialing in all of these different things that are going in here. You typically will have an idea of your parts and what you're targeting. So kind of common thing would be just use this as a general breakdown, right? Let's just say I have 20% of my costs going toward labor. I have 15%. Sorry, this would actually be more like 25%. That's being a little generous. And then that would be, so you got 40% there in expenses. So that leaves me with a 60% gross margin. And then let's say I've got my 40% in overhead. Then I'm left with my 20% profit. That's fabricated. Those aren't our actual statistics, but just giving you kind of an idea of how that flow would work. So now if I understand how these are breaking out, I can then back into my price point, right? Because I'll know, okay, how many workable hours do I have in a given year? And I can't remember it off the top of my head, but it's something like 2,000 or it's somewhere around that. So if I have 2,000 workable hours in a given year, how many of those are actually going to be productive? Well, in our business, we have, typically about 50% of drive time, right? So then you're left with 1,000 workable hours per year. So then I can break that by, let's just say month, for example, and that gives me how many hours per month. Anyways, you start to see where this is going, right? So now you're able to keep breaking it down. So then I could do it maybe by week, and then I can figure out, okay, so if I have that many hours per week, how many jobs can I do? And so let's just say it comes out to 3 jobs per day that you're ended up thinking. And then I can figure out, okay, well now, what do I have to charge in order to make my number be able to cover what I'm looking to get here, right? And that these numbers will align up. Because if I'm charging too low, then maybe my overhead ends up being 50% of this, and these things, all these expenses increase because they're as a percentage of sales, right? So if my number doesn't make sense, all of a sudden my math will be off. So what I'm really figuring out is, hey, what is the cost of operating my business, and then how much do I need to charge to make sure that I am able to do that successfully? So you can see how you're kind of like working backwards here in order to come up with the appropriate price. And then now hey, if I'm doing 3 jobs and I have to cover a certain amount each day and I need this much in profit, how much do those jobs need to average? And then you could figure out, okay, so if that, each hour, that's kind of get to your back end hourly rate of figuring out what that's going to look like. And then ultimately you're left with the actual dollar amount that you want to be going for. And then now, so having that in mind, you can going back to the confidence conviction piece, it's like, well, we know, an hour-long job needs to be charging at least this much, because if it's more, then we're not breaking out as much, right? And you can start doing it that way where, okay, well, maybe, if you have a multi-day job, you have more efficiencies, right? Because there's not as much drive time. You're not wasting as much in gas. You're not losing that 50% windshield time. So then you're able to offer those at lower prices, and that's where you can become more competitive. But you can't know that unless you've figured out your profit and loss statement, which is why it's so important as you're getting started to understand your numbers. And as you noticed, who did I not talk about during any of this? My competitors. I don't care what they're charging. It doesn't have anything to do with the cost of running my business. Now, over time, of course, you're gonna hear and you're gonna pay attention to what's going on, but ultimately, that didn't come up in this conversation, right? Because what they're charging has nothing to do with what I'm charging. I know what it is. And we hear these stories about plumbers. Oh my God, yeah, I thought you would be charging $50 an hour. We live in San Diego. I can't even drive to you for $50 an hour, right? Because I know that because of my numbers. So what ends up happening, and this is why it's so hard to run a business, but unfortunately, those people go out of business because they don't know how this works and they've been undercharging. And the fastest way to go out of business is to get a bunch of people that you're doing free work for, right? And the goal is to charge a fair price so everyone wins. The customer gets great, good service. You're able to back up the warranty that you've provided to them. And you're going to be around for 10 years to make sure that if anything ever happens, they know that they can call you and rely upon you. You're not getting the driveway warranty, as it's called, from the budget plumber who is, the moment he leaves your driveway, there goes your warranty with him because he's probably out of business and you're never going to see him again. So if you're new to the trades, or even if it's just you haven't really spent any time doing this, I highly recommend, work with a bookkeeper, get this stuff figured out, get it dialed in. It will really transform your business and give you a lot more confidence in knowing that you're doing things the right way and charging a fair price, which at the end of the day, the demand is there. Customers need us. It's up to us to do it ethically and responsibly and really provide them the best value we can for the dollars required to do it. I hope this is helpful. If you do have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments. I obviously, with this being a new podcast too, appreciate you liking, subscribing, and sharing it out if you got any value from it. Thank you. Cool.